Hello, NaNoWriMo. Thank you for joining us today for this podcast. I'm Grant Faulkner, and we are going to talk today about that wonderful but intimidating and overwhelming next step of the creative journey, publishing. It's intimidating because there's so much to know. You know, before this podcast, I was thinking I've self-published before. I've published with a small press, and I've published with a relatively large press. And I still feel like there's just so much to learn. I don't know it all. Every time I learn a little bit more, but I'm still, there's vast areas of knowledge that I do not have. And so we're gonna cover a lot of that today with our special guests, Stephanie Chandler. We're lucky to have her. She has done nearly everything in the book business, I think. I was reading her bio, and she has written a number of books. She's owned and run a bookstore in Sacramento. In fact, at that bookstore, she held NaNoWriMo write-ins there, NaNoWriMo writing gatherings. She's a frequent speaker at writing conferences, and she even hosts her own. It's all online. It's called the Nonfiction Writers Conference. And this year, the special speaker is Gretchen Rubin, who has also done NaNoWriMo. And Stephanie is also an entrepreneur and a marketing expert. So she's going to kind of cover the gamut of what it means to publish your book. And we're very, very thankful to have our sponsor, IngramSpark, sponsor this webcast. If you don't know IngramSpark, they're a self-publishing platform, and they've been awarded for distinguished service to the literary community alongside Toni Morrison and James Patterson. And with Ingram, you can access the same distribution enjoyed by major traditional publishers. And that means that you can share your book with 39,000 retailers and libraries, like think Barnes & Noble and other indie bookstores. And then they also have access to 70+ major online retailers like Amazon and Kobo and Apple iBooks. And here's the key thing to remember, that IngramSpark, they sponsored NaNoWriMo in November, and their sponsor offer is still good now. It has not expired. So upload your book for free through March 31st, 2018 with promo code NANO17. And if you can't remember that, go to our sponsor offers page on the NaNoWriMo website. It's under the Inspiration tab. So yeah, I hope you upload your book to Ingram after this webcast. So welcome, Stephanie. Thanks so much for joining us.
Hey, Grant. So glad to be with you today. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to learning a lot.
Okay, good. Me too.
I know I will. And my first question is since you've worked with so many writers, I'm curious, what's the most common question you're asked in terms of how to get published?
Where do I start? Like that's the number one question, because our industry is so overwhelming, and a lot of authors don't know if they should seek the self-publishing route or seek the traditional publishing route. So it's always, where do I start? And that's not an easy question to answer, because it really depends on what your goals are.
Yeah, well, I guess that's what I oftentimes hear from our NaNoWriMo authors is whether they should go the traditional route or the self-publishing route. And where would you go if you were totally in the dark about this and didn't know which way to go with your novel? How would you figure out what's best for you?
I think it's a very personal decision. Some of us, I was one of those people, really want that traditional book deal. You want that validation. And if that is your goal, then by all means, go through the process. It takes a long time, be prepared for that process, because by the time you query and you hopefully get an agent and then you go through the pitching process, it can take a year. And then the publisher that acquires the book can take another year to get it out. So if you're patient and this is a goal of yours, go through the process. But if you don't want to go through all of that, then by all means, self-publishing is easier than it's ever been. And it doesn't cost as much as it used to cost, and it gives you so much more control. So having done both myself, I still feel like it's a very personal decision. And either way, we talked about this before the call, that you're going to end up doing most of the marketing yourself anyway, usually.
Yeah. Interesting. I forgot to mention this in my intro, but for those people who are viewing, I'm going to interview Stephanie for 20 or 30 minutes or so, and then we're gonna take questions from you. So please be thinking of your questions and put them in the chat window, and our great producer Catherine will shoot them to me, and we'll try to get them all answered. But like just to touch a base a little bit on traditional publishing, Stephanie, I guess some people, I've heard the question, do you really need an agent? And what does an agent even do for you? And then the big question is, how do you find one?
So I didn't have an agent when I got my first book deal. I went with a smaller press, and then they sent over this 25-page contract and my head exploded. So I am a huge advocate of agents. I signed with an agent after that. Agents have the contacts. They know what can be negotiated. They know who's looking for what. So I think it's completely worthwhile to have an agent if you're going to go the traditional publishing route. So smaller presses will take authors directly, but big presses like Random House, you can't pitch them directly. They will only work with agents. So there's a lot of reasons why working with an agent makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know definitely no big publishing houses, or you'd be extremely lucky to find a way in without an agent. And it would probably have to work or find meet somebody at a conference or something like that. And even then, that's a huge long shot. One thing that I think the key part to finding, I mean, there are a couple key parts to finding an agent. One, I think it is a dizzying process to figure out. I mean, there are thousands of agents, and to find the one not only that will take you on, but the one that's good for you, that believes in your work and will represent it well, not just leave it on his or her desk. But I think one key to that is writing a good query letter. And I think query letters actually don't just apply to finding an agent. They also are part of your overall pitch for yourself if you self-publish. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what's the difference between a query letter and a pitch, and why does one need a pitch for a book?
So great question. And I failed to answer your last question, but where to find agents? You mentioned writers' conferences. Also, the Association of Authors Representatives, AARonline.org, is a great resource, and Publishers Marketplace. You're looking for the agent that handles your genre of writing. Now, as for your pitch and your query letter, every author needs a pitch. So whether you're self-publishing or traditional publishing, the concept of a pitch is that if you get stuck in an elevator with somebody, in 30 seconds or less, you can tell them what your book is about in a captivating way. So we all have to do this. We have to figure out how to describe our book and captivate an audience and make people want to read it. And once you have that pitch, you work it into your query. Generally, we open a query letter with this sizzling copy that makes the agent or the editor want to read that book. So that pitch becomes part of that, and it gets worked into the query. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. I mean, and within the query, you probably have about a paragraph or two for that pitch?
You do. And, you want to open with it. You want to reel them in right away before you launch into who you are and why you're the best person to write that book. Think about the number of query letters agents receive on a daily basis. And these days, they used to come by postal mail, right? Today, most of them come by email. And I imagine that agents just sit there with their finger on the delete key, right? They're just waiting to hit, nope, that's not going to work for me. So you want to reel them in right away and really make it exciting. This is why you want to attend things like writers' conferences and go to pitch practice sessions where you can get feedback from other people and really develop a powerful pitch that gets people's attention.
It's so intimidating and so frightening to do that. And I have personally never done it, but I've watched people do it, and I admire them so much. And I think, like you said, like just by doing it and getting feedback, that's the way to go. I mean, I wish I could say I was brave enough to do it.
I've never done it either. I've been somebody that helps people with their pitches, but maybe if you're in a small writers group, that might be a little less intimidating, and do it with that group.
Yeah. So I'm curious. I was going to mention, since you mentioned Publishers Marketplace, that reminded me. One tip to find an agent is to find out the agent who represents your favorite authors. Usually they have the agent in their acknowledgments, or you can find them somehow online. And I heard this other great tip recently is, a lot of those favorite authors might have a big superstar agent, and those big superstar agents oftentimes aren't accepting debut novelists. So sometimes going for a more junior agent in a really big, great firm can be the way to go. That might be more receptive to representing you. But Publishers Marketplace is a good way to find out all that information. Let's talk about self-publishing a little bit. The self-publishing, I mean, as you were saying earlier, it's grown so much in the last 5 to 10 years, and there's so many different ways to go about it, and so many people are self-publishing. If you go that route, what are the main tips you would advise people in order to prepare their novel to publish?
Lots of eyeballs on your manuscript. I think this is really key. There's that balance of too many cooks in the kitchen, but at the same time wanting it to be the best that it can be. And, Stephen King's memoir on writing is one of my favorite books. And he said he doesn't send it out to dozens of people. He has I think a couple of really close contacts that he has read and give him feedback on the book. So even Stephen King is getting feedback on his work. So I think that's so important that you have some sort of group of beta readers. And then, of course, lots and lots of editing is really important too.
Mm-hmm. For those beta readers, do you have any advice about, I know every writer's different, right? We need feedback at different stages. I personally don't wait. I wait until I've probably revised it 3 or 4 times, put it through 3 or 4 drafts before I get beta readers. Do you have any advice about when and maybe who people should go to?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's another personal choice. I don't like a lot of input on my manuscripts either until I'm at the very end. But if you're a new writer and maybe you're, not so sure of where you are, then round people up early. I would reach out to friends and family, people that you trust. Hopefully you're building a mailing list, because as writers, we should all have mailing lists. Reach out on social media, invite people into your beta reader group. The benefit of being a beta reader is that they get early access to your book, that they've got direct interaction with the author. And then down the road, when the book comes out, you've got all of these people out singing your praises and posting reviews. So there's a lot of benefits to beta readership. Guy Kawasaki talked a lot about beta readers when he wrote his book for authors and publishers. I think he had like hundreds of beta readers, and he had them like going through and editing and sending him feedback on punctuation and spelling. So, it's a very personal decision. That would make me personally crazy. So I would not do that. But if that sounds like fun to you, then by all means do it, and create maybe a private Facebook group where you can organize everybody. That's a really easy, free way to kind of coordinate the activity.
Mm-hmm. I was going to say, use the NaNoWriMo forums.
Oh, there you go.
Your buddies in NaNoWriMo, they're in the exact same writing position you are, and they're, I say that in part because I think sometimes going to friends and family can be a dangerous proposition. Once I asked, or I gave a good friend of mine a piece of my writing. This is when I was a very young writer, and he didn't say anything for a long time. And I finally asked him. I was like, "Hey, did you read that story?" And he, he's a very blunt guy, and he very bluntly said, "I'm your friend. I didn't ask to be your critic." And at the time, I thought that was a little rude, but in retrospect, I think it's true in a lot of cases that to foist to have a friendship or a family member and to say, read my novel and give me great feedback, it's a lot to ask. And sometimes when you have that personal, emotional relationship, those people, it can be a tough thing to go through, especially if they have a perhaps harsh critique. So I like to give it to people who are writers, who think about writing and hopefully write in my genre.
And also give them direction, right? Ask questions, maybe have a list of questions. Was this clear to you? Is the character development, does it make sense? Do you understand who this character is? So give them some guidelines so that they know what you're looking for back from them as well.
Yeah, I think that's really crucial. I try to ask just like 3 questions. Just to keep them very focused on what I want. And it helps me too, because like you said earlier, you can get a lot of different voices in your head and a lot of different opinions that can actually muddy the waters more than clear them up.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about, on that note, I think another great resource that we have these days that we maybe didn't have as much in past years is there are a lot of editors out there. And some people hire an editor. Do you advise hiring an editor for your manuscript?
1000%. No matter which way you're going to publish, editing really makes a manuscript better if you're working with the right editor or editors. So every author is different, and there's basically 3 levels of editing. There's developmental editing, and that's where the editor goes in and actually works on helping to make your manuscript better. It's kind of a back and forth relationship. It's very comprehensive. It takes a lot of time. The second level would be copy editing, where they're going in and maybe they're making some suggestions. You could clarify here, this doesn't make a lot of sense, that kind of thing, so that you're going back yourself and making adjustments. And then you get down to the proofread, which is basically your grammar, punctuation, spelling. So every writer's different. Some need all three levels of editing. Some just need kind of the basic copy edit and a proofread. But my feeling is you can never have too much editing. You can never have too many eyeballs, because I don't care if you go through 5 versions of proofreading, your book is still going to have a handful of typos in it. It's just the reality of a human job. So the more editing, the better is really my suggestion.
I agree. I've worked with editors in so many different capacities, whether it's a newspaper editor or a book editor, and not once, every single time, the piece is improved because of somebody else's eyes, and especially a professional editor's eyes. It is tough, though. I mean, making that leap and actually hiring somebody with your own money to do it. Can you give a sense of what one maybe should pay, or where one should go to look for an editor? I mean, it's a tough thing. I mean, to take that.
Yeah, it's one of the most expensive parts of the publishing process, because it is so labor and time intensive. So honestly, you can spend thousands of dollars on editing. Proofreading is going to be less. You can maybe get that done for around $500. But here's another thing I see writers run into. Don't ask your English teacher friend to do it for you. Good editors follow the Chicago Manual of Style. You've got consistency with things like serial commas and parallel bullets, and just there's rules that need to be followed. So I'm a huge advocate of hire a professional editor who does this for a living. And you can ask around with other writers and who they've worked with. Associations. I'm sure you guys recommend resources. We have recommended resources at Nonfiction Authors Association. I love Upwork. Upwork is a freelancers directory where you can find editors and book designers and website designers, and they're user reviewed. So it will tell you what kind of projects they've done before and how the people that hired them fared with those projects. So there's lots of places to find. And there's also the Editorial Freelancers Association. That's a great organization to find experienced editors. Mm-hmm.
I think it's so. I mean, there are a wealth of resources out there, and I've even heard as the publishing industry has changed. A lot of editors have actually been laid off, and now they're offering. They've worked for whatever Random House on great projects and stuff, and now they're doing it on a freelance basis. So you can actually hire a bona fide professional editor to look at your stuff.
Absolutely. A lot of the big publishing houses are outsourcing all of their editing to freelance now. So the same people who edited that New York Times bestseller could be editing your book if you've got a budget for it.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to talk a little bit about cover design, because I think one challenge for a self-published author is to have a book that looks like a traditionally published book, that has that sort of professionalism. And again, this is like usually hiring somebody. And I've heard critiques of self-publishing books that sometimes it's self-published by looking at the cover. So tell me a little bit about cover design, why it's important, and how one goes about getting a good one.
So speaking as a former bookstore owner, where authors walked in every day wanting us to carry their books, and we had a big shelf dedicated to local authors, I could immediately tell the self-published books because the covers didn't look like they came out of a New York publishing house. So the reality is we do judge books by their covers. Your cover is the most important first impression you're going to make on a potential reader. So this is where you want to go and invest in a professional cover designer, somebody that's all they do is book cover design. And I can't tell you how many, I've also been a publisher for 10 years, and how many authors have come to me and said, oh, my grandson is finishing up art school, he's going to do my cover. And, they don't understand the balance of the fonts on the page. And there's just, when you shrink that cover image down to an inch on Amazon, you still want it to be able to read that title. So there's little details that a professional cover designer is going to understand better than anybody else. So spend the money. And by the way, you're going to spend anywhere between $50 to $1,000 and up on a good cover design. In my experiences in that department, you kind of get what you pay for.
Hmm. Definitely. I think it's one thing that's really interesting about cover design that I think a lot of people forget, that the most important image might be that thumbnail online. So you're really designing for that small space, because that's what's going to get shared the most, or there are just certain confines there. Um, yeah. Well, let me go into a little bit, like once you've finished, you've got your book edited and formatted and the cover design, and now you're like excited to get it out there. And there's this question, this is where I think, like, as authors, we're entering this new realm often, which is called the business world.
Yes.
And so we've got to figure out, like, how to price our books.
Yeah.
And these days there's just such a spectrum, right? You can get books for 99 cents or $20 or more. How do you figure out what the right price is?
Well, you start by looking at your competitors and what they're charging, and you want to fall in that range. You don't want to overprice your book, because then you could potentially lose readers, especially in the fiction world. But if you underprice, you risk that same, perception of value, that maybe this is discounted for a reason. So I like to fall somewhere in the middle of whatever, is currently trending in that genre, and stick with that price. With ebook pricing, I am an advocate of price the first book in a series lower. So 99 cents to $2.99, or even a free giveaway, is a great strategy if you're writing a series, because you want to get people hooked on that first book so that they come back and they want to read the rest of your books. So lower prices maybe on the first in a series on the ebook, but for the others, stay within the genre's common price scheme.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I know there were for a while there was a lot of pricing pressure. Things were getting lower and lower and lower. Like, who could have imagined a 99-cent book 10 years ago? Are there still trends like that, or what are the kind of, what's going on?
I think it's getting better. I love to follow Mark Coker at Smashwords. He puts out a great industry study every year. And the last one I saw, the prices were trending up again in the ebook world. So I think we saw a lot of low pricing for a while. And then, a lot of people in the publishing industry were like, hey, you're undervaluing what you're offering here. So, and I don't know about you, but I'm a Kindle reader, and I see a lot of the New York publishing houses are charging $10.99, $11.99 for the Kindle edition. So they're, I think, helping to drive ebook prices up. I don't buy an ebook based on its price. I buy it based on the fact that I want to read it.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think pricing needs to be low necessarily to gain readership.
How do royalties work if you're a self-published author? What can you expect? What's a good rate?
Well, it's traditionally published.
Self-published. I guess add the traditionally published there just as a kind of contrast, so people understand the difference.
Yeah, there's actually a great contrast there. So with traditional presses, believe it or not, they actually pay authors about $1 a book on average. So if you get, let's say you get a $10,000 book advance, which is actually pretty good in today's climate, you will have to sell 10,000 books and earn your advance back $1 at a time before you ever see another dime. So this is definitely a factor in deciding if you want to traditionally publish or self-publish. With self-publishing, when you're creating distribution to Amazon, for example, you set your distribution discount. So retailers typically get between 40 to 55% discount. There's a lot of controversy about what you should set. But setting between 40 to 55%. So let's say you set it at 50% and your book is on Amazon for $10, just for math purposes. Amazon's going to take 50% off that price. So they're going to pay you $5. And then you deduct the cost of of printing that book. So maybe you printed the book for $2. Now, these aren't very realistic numbers, but what's left after the cost of printing the book is your royalty earned. So in that case, you'd make $3 per book. And you will always make more money when you sell books directly. So if you're doing author events and things like that, and you don't have to give up that 40 to 50% discount, all you're earning is the difference between your wholesale cost. And if you're printing with like IngramSpark, for example, your wholesale cost might be $3 or $4 a book, and then you're selling it for $14. You're making a really nice profit of maybe up to $10 per book. So there's a lot of profit to be made on the self-publishing side, not so much profit to be made on the traditional publishing side. That's just the reality.
Mm-hmm. Well, since we're talking profits, I think the next step is like, actually, it's tough to sell 10,000 books, right?
Yes, it is.
Not an easy thing. You just put it up on Amazon, and it's not like there are 10,000 people waiting there to buy your book.
No.
What are your, let's ask, what are your 3 top marketing tips?
Well, I'm a huge fan of blogging. I think every writer needs a blog. We are writers. We really have no excuse not to be blogging. And blogging to me is the heart of your social media strategy. And so, take each blog post, share it in social media, and start building your audience that way. Next would be book reviews. Book reviews are critically important. And I can't emphasize this enough. Book reviews sell books on Amazon. They also factor in, we believe, to Amazon's algorithms. Amazon doesn't tell us how it ranks books and when it shows based on a keyword search. Like if I search for murder or mystery, I don't know how Amazon's deciding, but my guess is Amazon is factoring in how many reviews the books have, because that tells them how popular the books are. So lots and lots of reviews. My favorite way to get Amazon reviews is to look at my competing titles, competing books, and scroll down to their book reviews and click on each book reviewer. Every book reviewer on Amazon has a public profile, and 8 times out of 10 book reviewers list their email address because they want to receive free review copies. It's to their benefit to do that. So you can actually go through and find and build a list of people who are reviewing books in your genre and send an email and say, hey, would you like a review copy of my book? And by the way, be willing to give away those review copies. That's so, so important. Factor that into your budget and offer them whether they want a print or a digital edition, because everybody's different today. And then third, I would say get out and use internet media. Industry blogs are great. Romance writers, you have such an advantage, and the mystery writers as well. There are networks and networks of reader review blogs. So get out there and send your review copies out to the people who are reviewing the romance novels and the murder mysteries and things like that, because they've got a following too who are looking for your books. And you can get on Google and search for, Western book review and find websites and blogs that are reviewing those books and start getting them out there, because not only do you want reviews on Amazon, but you want reviews on other people's blogs, on their podcasts, on with any kind of influencer that reaches a broad audience.
Mm-hmm. That's so interesting. I've heard that about Amazon, how they position your book differently depending on the number of reviews. Do you have any? A lot of people I know they don't broadcast it or it's not out there, but there are a lot of rumors. Do you know anything about the different levels? How many reviews you need to get over that like first tier? I've heard 20 or 25.
I've heard so many different numbers. I've heard 85. I've heard 75. My experience is it depends on the genre too, because if you're in a really small niche category, it's a lot easier to get ahead of the curve. But if you're in a big, broad category, like a general fiction, it's going to be much harder to stand out. So, I would say a minimum of 30 reviews should be your goal, because that tells people that book is being read. But another thing to do is get in the habit of always asking for reviews. You're going to hear from readers. When you get an email from a reader that says, hey, I loved your book, just wanted to give you a shout out, reply, hey, thank you so much. Would you mind posting a review for me on Amazon? We have to get in the habit. And I forget to do that myself. So get in the habit of always trying to add more book reviews.
So this is like so super tough for introverted writers.
Yes, it is.
We're kind of taught not to ask for things. And I think that also carries over to social media in general. How many, like when you mentioned blog posts, how often should people be writing blog posts? How often should they posting those links on Twitter and Facebook or whatever? Is there a degree of frequency that matters, or is it more about the conversational tone? What makes an effective social media campaign?
So statistically, the more often you blog, the more traffic your site is going to receive. That's just the reality. So if you blog Once a week, you're going to get X number of traffic. If you blog 5 times a week, you're going to get 5 times the traffic. So part of that is up to you. A big missing factor for a lot of writers is finding your niche, your subject matter. What are you going to write about, right? So you've got to find a theme within your book or some sort of cause that you can weave through the books that you write, that gives you a foundation for your blog. Your blog needs to have a focus. It's not about where you just went on vacation and, the great Thai food you had last night at dinner, right? You want to be entertaining your audience. And I'm thinking of an author, Beth Albright. She writes these really cute chick lit novels, which are set in the South, Alabama. And so she blogs about Southern living and, recipes for sweet tea. And, she's found her hook. So, that's the first step. If you really figure out the right content to be blogging and then sharing it on social media, your audience is going to grow because you're pulling them in. But that's probably one of the biggest challenges for every writer, is figuring out what that's going to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you don't want to look so me all the time, right?
Yeah, exactly. You want to be serving your audience in some way, for sure.
Well, we've got a lot of viewer questions here. I'm going to switch over to those, but I want to ask you one last question, since you're a marketing expert. What was your personal biggest marketing challenge when you started doing this?
Well, it's the same marketing challenge I still have. It's making time, right? And I think every author is probably nodding along right now. I don't have time for this. But so here's the reality. Even the New York Times bestselling authors have day jobs. I don't know a single author who has the luxury of marketing their books full time, not one. Even Stephen King doesn't have that kind of time, right? So we have to carve out time. And I like to view marketing kind of like gardening. I like to compare the two. So if you walked out into your garden every day and you dropped 3 seeds, and then you walked away, and then the next day you dropped 3 more seeds, over time, you're going to have a beautiful garden. Marketing is the same thing. So if you do 3 things every day, you write a blog post, you pitch yourself to a podcast, you reach out to a small trade publication and offer to write an article, whatever it is, 3 things every day, I promise you that over time, your audience is going to grow. It has to. It's just how it's going to work out. So I'd love questions.
I love that metaphor. 3 things, 3 seeds a day. I've heard something similar, advice to not, because it can be so overwhelming, right? Just like you said, every author's challenge is time. And so I've heard some people say 7 minutes a day on Twitter or 7 minutes a day on social media, something that's very doable, but very contained, and that you build it incrementally.
And let me say about social media, because that intimidates a lot of writers too. You don't have to do it all. You don't have to be on Snapchat and Instagram and Twitter and LinkedIn. Pick 1 or 2 and do those really well, and do the ones where your audience is spending time. If you're going after a younger audience, get on Instagram. If you're going after an older audience, you probably want to get on Facebook. So, pick 1 or 2 and do those well. You do not have to do it all.
Thank God.
All right.
I can't keep up with them all. I'm going to switch to some of our great viewer questions. Claire Chamberlain asks, how does paying agents work?
Paying agents earn a percentage. They actually pay you. So when you sign with an agent, they're signing on for, and I'm totally drawing a blank on the percentage that they get, 15%.
15%, right?
Yeah, I think it's 15. And that's going to be part of your agreement. And then if you get your book deal, the payments from the publisher are going to go to the agent, and the agent is going to take their 15% out and cut you a check for the rest. So that's how it works. You're not mailing checks to the agent. The agent's taking it out of what you're earning.
Yeah, thank God. This comes from Yankees Loving Bat. Does the rule about sending a manuscript to yourself for copyright purposes still apply?
I would not count on that as protection. The best thing to do is go to copyright.gov and register your manuscript. You can upload it digitally. It costs about $30. Takes about 20 minutes to fill out the paperwork, and that gives you the legal protection that you need.
So I hear this question a lot where people, fiction writers will say they'll be wary of sharing their concept or their idea for a novel because they're worried about somebody else stealing it. And my position is that I've never met a writer who didn't have too many ideas.
Yeah.
Like I don't know any writers who are looking to steal other people's ideas. And
Yeah.
even if they did, they would execute and write those ideas so differently that the novel, I don't even know that they would really compete with each other. How do you feel about that?
100%. I don't worry about anybody stealing my work, sharing my work. Even once it's written, you can go to the library and borrow books for free, right? So if my book gets shared, great. I've just gained a new fan. Last year we had Seth Godin as our opening speaker for our annual conference. And he said, your problem is not piracy. Your problem is obscurity. One of my favorite quotes ever, because it's the truth. That's where our energy should be. It should be on getting known and building an audience, not on worrying about somebody taking our ideas or sharing our work with their friends, because that's only gaining you more and more fans, right?
Yeah, definitely. That's a great quote. I was going to say, for our viewers who don't know who Seth Godin is, he's a big time marketing guru, business guy, right?
He's amazing. Publishing, go read Tribes. That's my favorite book he wrote, Tribes. It's about how to build your community. It's brilliant.
Okay, cool. I'll check it out. This one comes from Diana Duncan. She is wondering, a good place to look for cover designers. This is a great question. Where would you find a cover designer for a novel if you had one?
Upwork.com is a great place to find freelancers in general. I don't know of a cover designers association. So you're looking at probably the freelance directories, and, ask around with authors whose books you like, because, if you're involved in author circles or on the NaNoWriMo forums, ask for recommendations. There will be no shortage of great cover design recommendations. And then check the cover designer's portfolio and make sure you like their work, because they may have great work, but it may not match your style. And that's really important too.
Yeah, I was going to say there are a lot of marketplaces out there, like Readsy's one of our sponsors, and like they have editors and cover designers that you can choose from, and you can see how they're ranked, and they'll bid on projects, things like that. When I self-published, I found it a really interesting experience. I fortunately had a friend who recommended like 10 different designers to choose from, but I still felt a little blind. I was choosing on all, what I could determine about their aesthetic on other books. Yeah. The thing I liked about it, though, is that as a self-published author working with a designer, you're really in this highly collaborative, creative environment, and I would have certain notions of where I wanted the cover to go, and she very expertly guided me in a different direction, because that was her job. She knew a good cover. So I thought it was a very interesting creative process.
Well, you just spoke to the benefit of working with a professional cover designer, because they do understand those intricacies that maybe we don't know. Maybe I've had situations where the cover was too busy. I worked with an author once. He'd gone so far as to have a logo designed, printed on shirts. He came to us for publishing, and I got to tell you, and he's given me permission to tell this, but it was an awful logo. It made a terrible cover. And I said, please, let's let the book cover designer come up with the concept. And if you hate it, we'll scrap it. But and you can't believe what a difference great cover design makes. It was night and day. And that author was so thrilled with the end result. To throw away a lot of t-shirts, but it was worth it in the end.
I bet. Yeah. I was going to say, per your earlier estimates, I think you mentioned some dollar figures for cover designers. And I don't know if I was just lucky, but I think I paid $200 or $300, and I couldn't have gotten a better cover. So I might have paid for the photo that went on the cover in addition. But anyway.
And you do have to buy the stock art, right? So that's something to be really aware of, that you've got to buy images that you're going to use on the cover. You can't go to Google and pull an image for your blog, for your book, for anything. There are huge fines involved. So you want to go to like an iStock photo or a 123rf.com to acquire images for your cover.
Yeah, good advice. This is a great question from Samantha Zhang. How do you get books into brick and mortar bookstores if you are self-publishing?
Great question. Absolutely. It's called book distributors. Book distributors have their sole job is to go out and get books placed in bookstores, in retailers, airport bookstores, gift shops, all different kinds of places. The thing about working with book distributors is that it's expensive, because they're going to expect probably around 65 to 70% off your cover price, because keep in mind, they need room to make a profit on that book too. So they're going to expect a big chunk off your cover price. You also have to apply. Just because you have a book doesn't mean they'll take you. They need to know that you're doing marketing, that you're creating demand. Because if they get your book placed at Barnes & Noble, for example, and that book doesn't sell within 60 days, Barnes & Noble is going to send all those books back, and you're going to have to issue a complete refund for all of those books. The book industry is one of the screwiest industries in the retail perspective, because retailers expect to be able to return books. You can't really do that in other, like a clothing industry. If they don't sell out on jackets, those jackets don't get returned to the manufacturer. They get sold off at TJ Maxx, right? The book industry expects to be able to return. So book distributors are tricky. I tell authors, unless you're creating a lot of demand, focus on selling online. And the other way to get into bookstores is to create reverse demand. So if you're doing the work and you're getting publicity and people are walking into Barnes & Noble and asking for your book, I guarantee you Barnes & Noble is going to reach out to you and want to be able to buy your books from you directly or through Ingram. So if you're publishing with IngramSpark, you're distributed through Ingram, then Barnes & Noble can order your book. So create reverse demand, put your efforts there, and then you don't have to spend all that extra percentage points on the distributors.
Mm-hmm. Does it help, especially for a self-published author, to begin with trying to get into the local bookstores where they might have a relationship?
It can. Yeah, it doesn't hurt at all. Speaking as a former bookstore owner, we definitely support local authors. You can do events at local bookstores. But a bookstore is going to carry 2 or 3 copies, in general. And if they don't move, again, they get sent back or they get put away somewhere. So I really think it's best to focus your efforts online. You can just get more bang for your buck doing that.
Mm-hmm. Stone Productions asks, what are the 3 questions you ask of your beta readers to keep them focused? And I was just going to say, it depends on the writing project itself. Yeah. So those 3 questions tend to change. But definitely, I think if I was just going to broadly answer it for general things, it's just like, where are the weak points? Where does the story stop captivating you? I always like the question of how would you revise this?
Yeah, I can't add anything to that. That's perfect.
Yeah, okay. I didn't mean to answer it for you. I just like what's going on mine. Well, good. Let's see here. I got to dig up another question. So this is interesting because I think a lot of authors are juggling numerous projects. They're writing while they have a project in motion, while they're publishing it, and they might even have a project that's already published and out there that they're doing a promotion for. So Thea / asks, as an author, how do you pace yourself? That is, how do you write new material while revising other material, while querying, while getting things published, etc.? What is your method? You can answer the question every writer wants to know, right?
You go read Getting Things Done by David Allen. It's a great time management book. That's a time management issue. We all struggle with it, myself included. Another book I love is Miracle Morning by Hal Elrod. And in a nutshell, Hal talks about getting up before the sun, because if you want your goals badly enough, you've got to make some sacrifices. And, the most successful people do things before we all have breakfast, right? So it's carving out to time. I like to do blocks of time in my day. Maybe you start your day with 2 hours of writing time, and then you carve out a time for marketing and an hour for marketing, and then you carve out another hour for writing queries. And then you take lunch and you drink a lot of coffee, and then you go back and keep doing it, because, it's the eternal challenge for every one of us is how to manage that time.
So tough. When you were just answering that question, do you do things in blocks of time? Like when you're writing, and when you're promoting, or do they bleed into each other?
That's how I personally like to work. I like to carve out time. What I do on a typical work day is I sit down at my desk, and I always have a running to-do list, and it's like a mile long, but I pick at least 3 tasks I'm going to accomplish that day, and I carve out the time for those tasks. And then if I have extra time, I might work on a marketing project or write an extra blog post. But I always pick 3 tasks every day and carve out that time.
Yeah, we work the same way. I've got this big long list that never ends. But it's true. You got to prioritize a few things that are manageable.
I'm selfish with my writing time. I like to lock myself up in a hotel room and write for a weekend. And that's how I've done the last several books. is literally at the Hampton Inn, 5 miles from my house. I will lock myself up for a weekend and write for 12 hours straight. So we all have our little quirky habits. I can't work in a cafe. Some of you thrive in cafes. So you have to find what works best for you.
I do the same thing. I call them mini writing retreats.
Yeah.
And I do, other than like NaNoWriMo, which is a big kind of writing retreat or boot camp.
Yes.
Mini writing retreats, like to take a weekend or a 3-day weekend, it really is a great way to jumpstart a project and really just kind of fuel it, you know, in a way that an hour here and there just doesn't do it.
It's so true. And if you're disciplined, you know, lug a case of water in and have your pizza delivered and just write like crazy. It is the best feeling ever. I love that.
Yeah, good. Carly Birch asks this great question. Can you do both? Self-publish, then try to find an agent or publisher?
You can. It depends. So here's the catch-22. If your self-published book doesn't do well, that becomes an issue when you're trying to get a publisher. Now, publishers rarely want to acquire a book that's already published, right? They want to acquire maybe your next book. So, and this is what I personally did. So I self-published my first book. It was a business startup guide. And in that process, I was building an audience, a high traffic website, a mailing list. And the book actually sold really well for a self-published book. I sold several thousand copies. So a year later, when I was ready to get a book deal, I was able to say, we sold X, you know, thousands of copies. I've got this kind of website traffic. The mailing list has grown to this many people. And the publisher was, I sent out 2 proposals. I got a book deal within, you know, weeks. So if you're doing the work and building your platform with your self-published book, you can absolutely go after a publisher with your next book. But if your first book doesn't do so well, you're going to have to be able to answer that question too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's tough. This is a great question in terms of marketing. Michael Anthony Rouleau asks, isn't one of the benefits of traditional publishing that they do the marketing for you and leave you with more time to write? What do you think?
That is one of the biggest myths in publishing. I'm so sorry to tell you that. Sometimes the publisher dedicates some marketing budget, but for the most part, the publishers are putting their marketing budget in their already known authors. And even that bookstore space, when you walk into Barnes & Noble and you see the end caps and the tables of new releases, that's not arbitrarily picked. That is being paid for by publishers. Publishers pay for placement in bookstore shelves. So no, I've had this situation too. I had one of the publishers said to me, "Oh, we're going to sign you a publicist. You're going to do great." She got me 1 radio interview and 1 blog interview. That was it. And I could do that myself in the next hour. I could book, 6 times that many interviews. So absolutely do not count on the publisher to do your marketing for you. And do not expect that in your proposal. In your proposal, when you do your marketing section, you need to say what you're doing to market your book. And that is a huge part of selling a book, is that marketing plan within the proposal. So do not sit back and hope that that publisher is going to do it for you, because they're not. And here's the other catch. If they publish your book and you don't do the marketing work and they don't do the marketing work and the book doesn't sell, you're not going to get another deal with them, right? So, it always comes back to having to do the marketing work.
Mm-hmm. Times have changed, right?
Yeah.
Those times when the publicity department would line up a whole book tour for you and then maybe even pay for the plane ticket and the hotel rooms.
Yeah.
Very few authors get that type of treatment.
Very few authors. Yeah.
Yeah. And even you mentioned, Stephen King being on Twitter. And I know Stephen King technically doesn't need to be on Twitter to sell his books, but you look out there and you see so many wildly successful authors, and they're I think a lot of it, they enjoy that conversation with their readers and that direct contact. But on the other hand, they are out there doing stuff to get their books in people's hands because it's such a crowded market.
Yeah, you've got to be out there actively. And one tactic I didn't mention, but I think is a really good one for authors, is speaking. Speakers sell books. It's just a fact. So, if speaking interests you, put together some topics and get out there and start speaking. In Sacramento here, we have a local author named Cindy Sample. She writes murder mysteries. She actually quit her corporate job to become a full-time murder mystery writer. And one of her speaking topics is it's never too late to start something new. And that's a really popular topic that she can take to all kinds of organizations. and she gives a really inspiring talk. And then at the end of it, people love her and they want to buy her books. So your talk doesn't even necessarily have to be directly related to your book. It just has to get you in front of people who are potential readers of your book.
Great advice.
I totally went on a tangent there, but I want to make sure.
No, good. Well, here's a good question, because I think especially beginning authors struggle with this. Jessica Bata asks, what's the importance of an author bio in a query letter? And I'm just going to take that a step further. I think if you're an author who hasn't published before and can't make that big case of here's all my work and here's how great I am, how do you do that as a beginning author? What would you advise?
That's tricky. I would say to try and get some sort of credits to your name, write for your local community newspaper. That is how I started. I live in this teeny tiny little community of Gold River, and I wrote for the Gold River newspaper. We have 3,000 homes in this community. But that was a starting point. I wrote book reviews for that. And I wrote really bad book reviews, by the way. It took me a while to learn. But any way that you can get some experience, some clips, enter writing contests, any kind of acknowledgement is going to help boost your bio up. But if you don't have that, maybe you've built up an Instagram following or a Twitter following. Play up your strengths, play down your weaknesses. They're looking for, why are you the best person to write this book? And hopefully your writing sells it for you, but they are looking at that bio and they want to see that you've got some sort of credibility too.
It's tough as a debut novelist, but that was great advice, because the great thing about the internet is there are so many places you can write, and so many actually online magazines that need writers, reviewers, so I think there are opportunities out there. Sometimes you might not get paid, but you are developing your chops and building a resume. Let's see if I've got any other questions here. Let's see. Clan Crenshaw. I know how you're going to answer this, I think, but maybe you'll surprise me. He asks, how worried do I need to be about making sure the names, places, and story ideas that I've made are unique and not being used elsewhere?
I don't think that it really matters if your settings and your names and things match others. You can't copyright the title of a book unless it's a series. You can't copyright a character in a book. There are thousands of books written that are set in San Francisco. So you really don't have to worry much about that. I actually think setting is a really cool way to find your audience. Kemble Scott is a novelist who his books are based in San Francisco, and he found a great readership there by publishing a literary journal in San Francisco. And then he ended up writing a column for the New York Times. And so, you've got to find your audience within that setting and not be afraid to overlap with others.
Well, good. Well, I'm going to remind people, these are great questions. Please put more in chat if you have them, and Catherine will send them to me. I'm going to see if I have any more questions for Stephanie here. So I'm curious if you could say one thing to a new author looking to publish, what would it be?
Just take it one day at a time. Honestly, I know it's overwhelming and there's a lot of mixed advice out there, but you don't have to do it all. You can just take it one day at a time. The other thing about publishing is it's a marathon, right? It doesn't have to be a race. And I'm going to say something very controversial here, but I could care less about Amazon bestseller lists. I don't care. They really don't mean much. I had an author once who she actually hired a company to help get her book onto the Amazon bestseller list. And this company got, a number of people to tweet about the book on the release day. And we're watching and it's kind of slowly climbing and it makes it into the top 2 of this teeny tiny financial category on Amazon. And the author was so excited, and she called me and she said, I can't wait. I'm going to write a big check to my, charity. And, how many books did I sell? And we looked it up, and guess how many books she sold that day?
Oh my gosh, you put me on the spot. I don't know, 38?
30.
Okay.
30. That is nothing to write, a charitable check for. She spent thousands of dollars to have this company manage that campaign. And quite honestly, that company was probably sitting there just ordering the books themselves, because that's all it took was 30 sales. And that she stayed in that category for like an hour and never went back. It had no long-term value. So focus on the long game is my point here. You are always on tour. You are always looking for opportunities. You're always available for interviews. It is a long game. Don't put so much pressure on yourself to get it all done at once and be a bestseller. I hate that term now. It's just devalued the real bestseller list, which to me are, like the New York Times.
Well, I joke that everyone's a bestseller these days.
Well, that's the fact. And it really doesn't mean much anymore. And it doesn't have a long-term value for the book.
Yeah. I think also, I was going to say, like, I do think being an author is full of so many different types and levels of rejection, or you can feel rejected. And I think it's a marathon, not a sprint. Advice is really good. It's because it's so much about having endurance and staying in the game, and also finding a reason why you're doing it. I mean, I know everybody has different reasons. I'm more gratified when I'm so touched when somebody like tweets an image of my book. That's like better than 1,000 book sales. So let's see, we got a great question here from Sushi Must Write on building that presence. How does one transition from a well-established online handle to using the name that appears on the covers?
So you have a different name, for example? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, so Sushi Must Write, that is her online handle. It's well established. She's got a lot of followers. She's very popular. And so she's asking, she has a name that might appear differently on a cover.
Yeah, so that's tricky. You may actually want to change your online handle to match your cover. Twitter lets you make that change. I would imagine Instagram does too. So, and Facebook also lets you change page name, even a page theme. So if your long run is to be with that name, that pen name, then I would say try to align all of your branding with that, because otherwise it's hard to invite people to a new account. This is the same reason I tell people I'm not a big fan of individual book websites, because if you plan to write 10 books in your career, you're going to have 10 different websites to manage. So try to get all of your branding under one umbrella, if at all possible. If you're writing in the same genre, if you're writing in different genres, you're going to have different presence. You're going to have your romance handle and your murder mystery handle. It's just, you're going to confuse people otherwise.
Yeah, it's a tough one, isn't it?
Yeah.
Flock of Foxes asks, is reading your book chapter by chapter as a podcast or creating short side stories set in the world of your book worthwhile?
I'm a big fan of podcasting. I actually think podcasting is kind of on fire right now. And if podcasting interests you, it's a great time to get in on it. It's inexpensive. There's lots of opportunity there. I don't know that it hurts you to read your audiobook in a podcast, but I don't know that you're necessarily going to attract people. The thing about podcasts is you have to market that just as you do your book, just as you do your blog. So is it worthwhile? I don't know. I would almost rather suggest that you turn it into an audiobook with Audible, because audiobooks are selling like crazy. The website is acx.com, where you can actually produce your own audiobook, or you can work with voice talent to create an audiobook for you. You can get it done for under, $2,000, and audiobook sales are also exploding right now. Google, Apple's CarPlay app is now in the dashboard of cars, which means that in new cars coming off the assembly line have the podcast app, have the audiobooks app right there on the dashboard of the car. I mean, I want a new car just so I can get that app. I think it is so cool. So we are moving in the direction of audio format. And I mean, you can do it for free on a podcast, but I think I'd turn it into an audiobook and get paid for it.
Yeah, I was even going to take this a different direction. There's so many cool online publishing sites where you can publish your book in serial format, and whether it's Wattpad or I've encountered a bunch of reading apps and online sites that do that, and it seems like it's almost like what you were saying earlier, by pricing the book, that first book, really low in the series and then building off of that. And I would assume that you can really create a huge community of readers for your book if you're serializing it.
Absolutely. It's all about your content and reeling them in and keeping them engaged. So everything you do hopefully is connecting with that audience. And you know who your audience is, because this is another piece. Not everybody reads historical fiction, right? So you have to find the people who read the genre that you're writing for.
Mm-hmm. Well, thanks so much, Stephanie. We're at an hour now. You answered these questions just brilliantly. I'll put you on the spot for one last parting word of encouragement, advice, inspiration, whatever you want.
Oh my gosh, this writing and publishing a book is one of the most rewarding things you will ever do. Don't wait until you retire, until you have more time, until your kids are grown, because this is where, life is short. I've been through loss. We've all been through loss. Go do it now and enjoy this ride, because it is, like you said, when you see somebody tweet a cover of your book. I just got an email last week on a book that I wrote 10 years ago that shouldn't even be in print anymore because it's so outdated, but the reader loved it and took the time to send me a note. And that makes my whole week. So this is such a fun journey. Don't be overwhelmed by it. Don't be scared by it. Just go have fun with it.
I love that, because it's a very NaNoWriMo message to enjoy.
Yes. NaNoWriMo is so cool. Yes, yeah, go do it.
Put yourself out there. We did a webcast with Hugh Howey years ago, right before he kind of became famous. And I noticed in the webcast, he kept saying the word self-confidence. You've got to have the self-confidence to put yourself out there. You've got to have the self-confidence to dive in and write the novel, but then you've got to have the self-confidence to go all those other ways. And I find that, like I said earlier, the path, being an author is filled with different kinds of rejection, and the way back up to be resilient is to realize that your story matters and to put it out there. So.
And you mentioned being an introvert. I happen to be an introvert as well, believe it or not. Yeah, I really am. I like quiet space and nobody around me. And I will be exhausted when this is over. But, you do kind of have to get over yourself and be willing to get out there. But C. Hope Clark wrote a great book called The Shy Writer. So I'm a big reader. So that's another recommendation for those of you who can relate to not really wanting to put yourself out there. We kind of have to find ways to communicate that are comfortable for us. And sometimes we just have to get over ourselves a little bit.
Great. I love that. Well, thank you so much again, Stephanie. I'm going to remind our viewers that we thank IngramSpark again and remind them of the great offer they have to upload your book for free through March 31st, 2018 with the promo code NANO17. If you don't remember this, well, you can watch this webcast again, or you can go to our website and look for the sponsor offer under the Inspiration tab. So thanks again, Stephanie.
Thanks, Grant. Really enjoyed it. Thanks, everyone, for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.